Hey guys, occasionally we get questions from people asking about private gun ownership in Japan. So we did actually make a video some time ago addressing that, talking about how very few guns in Japan, Japanese people aren't really interested in owning guns. The only people that really own them are usually farmers or hunters or other people with legitimate reasons to own them, and even then Japanese people aren't real interested. As a result of that, Japan, with a population of 127 million people, averages less than one gun death a year. So on average, less than one person a year in Japan is killed by a gun. So that's pretty good, isn't it? Obviously their attitude towards guns works. So if you want to see that video, we talked about that a bit more on that topic. If you want to see more about that, we'll put a link underneath this video. However, this one is about something that's a bit more topical. It's just been a recent discussion about this in Japan. Interestingly, someone left a comment this week on one of the videos about something totally different. There was a video about some totally different topic, but if people want to talk about guns, they'll often bring up the topic on totally unrelated videos. And someone left a comment made this statement that Japanese people aren't allowed to own guns because the American government controlled Japan after World War II and they changed the rules so that Japanese people aren't allowed to own guns, which isn't obviously true, but it's a common myth. It is a common myth. So interestingly, that statement was made this week on one of our videos, and then in the news this week, in the news in Japan this week, there was a discussion because in the 1970s there were approximately 500,000 registered hunters in Japan. So if you want to own a gun for hunting, because there are feral animals in Japan that eat crops and things, so deer and boar and birds and things like that eat the crops and things. So people are allowed to have permits to hunt animals in Japan, because obviously it's a tradition as well. People have been hunting animals to eat in Japan forever, so that they're allowed to continue to do that. But in order to have that gun, you have to have had some training and you have to have a license for it, which is reasonable, isn't it? So in the 1970s, there were 500,000 registered hunters in Japan who owned guns and did some hunting in Japan of feral animals. At the moment, there are, let's get this right, 105,000 registered hunters in Japan. So in the 1970s, 40 years ago, there was 500,000 registered hunters in Japan. Now there are 105,000, so that's less than a quarter, isn't it? Almost a fifth of the number of hunters that there was 40 years ago, and 2/3 of those are over 60 years of age, which illustrates really, really clearly exactly what we said in the other video, that Japanese people aren't into guns. You know, that myth about Japanese people can't have guns, well they can, but they're not into it, they're not interested. And it actually has become a bit of an issue, because what's happening is, because there aren't many hunters now, it means that the feral animals are sort of getting to have a bit of free reign in some parts of Japan. And here's another statistics. It means that at the moment Japan is losing $170 million a year worth of crops. $170 million a year worth of crops due to feral animals. So that's why it was actually in the news, was because they're saying that it's become a bit of an issue. There are not enough people going hunting animals to keep control of the feral animals, and that it's costing Japan $170 million in lost crops. So interesting, isn't it? It's sort of the opposite of the problems that some other countries are having with too many people wanting guns and wanting to go kill animals and things, and that they have to start controlling how many animals they can kill and things, and quotas and all sorts of things like that, isn't there? Because there's more people wanting to kill animals than there are animals there to be killed, whereas here it's the opposite. There's that many feral animals, but there's not that many people who want to be shooting them. They're just not into it. So most Japanese people tend to see guns as scary, which is not an unhealthy attitude, is it? So when we have talked about guns, and people will often ask, because they've heard that, you know, in Australia some people have guns, and they know that I used to carry guns, and some people, when they hear about these things, want to know about it, but inevitably they go, oh, kawaii, you know, guns scary. So, you know, which is good. If you live here, it's a really good thing, knowing that there aren't people wandering around with guns. You know, very rare. In my time here, in all my time here, only once out in the countryside did I see two guys walking along with guns over their arms. They were obviously hunting birds. So, interesting thing that you do sometimes see here is there are areas here where they don't want you hunting. They don't want you shooting guns, usually because it's a little bit too built up. There's a few too many houses around, or just for other reasons they don't want you shooting guns. And in that case, you usually see this sign here, this sign. You'll sometimes see areas where please don't hunt here. They marked please don't hunt here. But so interesting. Inevitably, we know that some people are so enthusiastic about guns. We get it all the time on both our channels, but in the Japan channel as well, and this channel as well. So we know that there'll be sure to be some people who pop up and say, what's the chances of me getting a gun in Japan? We've been asked that before. We've actually had people with varying degrees of enthusiasm ask about, you know, can I get a gun in Japan? And usually the answer to that is you don't need a gun in Japan, you know. You don't need it. Probably you don't need a gun anywhere, but particularly you don't need a gun in Japan. But we've had some people really ask. We've actually had comments from people on the gun video saying that that's a deciding factor for them. If they can't own a gun, they don't want to live in a country where they can't own a gun, which is amazing, isn't it? So inevitably someone's going to pop up on this video and say, oh, what's my chances of getting a hunter's license in Japan? Well, you probably could. However, so those of you who've seen our Pilots in Japan playlist have seen the tests and the examinations that we had to pass in Japanese in order to get the appropriate licensing and approvals and so on. So if your Japanese level is high enough that you can take written tests in Japanese and probably verbal examinations in Japanese as well, and pass all of those in Japanese with a legitimate reason to be hunting or in some other way owning a gun, then you probably can. But it's only going to be, again, as we said in the other video, if you can prove that you're going to work as a hunter in Japan, you're going to actually do some legitimate hunting in Japan in some places that you're actually allowed to be, because that's the other thing, is it's all private property, so you need to have permission from the people whose land you're going to be hunting on. So if you can prove all that, or if you're proving that you're going to be in some sort of competitive shooting organization in Japan, and again you'll have to pass all the written examinations in Japanese, then you could possibly manage to get a gun in Japan. But to be honest, the chances of anybody, a foreigner, actually being able to do that is just so remote. That, you know, our advice would be, if you really are so dead set on owning a gun and it's really important to you, just don't do it. Don't come here, because it's not the place. It's not the place for gun lovers. It really isn't, obviously, as you can see, you know. So anyway, there it is. Thought somebody might be interested in that. Did we get out all the statistics? Yeah, 500,000 registered hunters down to 105,000. Two-thirds of them are over 60, which means that they're guys that have obviously been doing it for a long time anyway. They're probably most of the guys from back in the 70s, in fact, and just the young people just aren't interested in doing it, obviously. And yeah, deer, boar and birds. So yeah, again, it just illustrates that Japanese people really just aren't interested in guns, don't want them, not interested, don't want to do it. Can if they want to, because for a Japanese person it wouldn't be hard. With this current attitude that the government has, that they want to take care of these feral animals, if a Japanese person wanted to go and get a hunter's license, I would imagine at the moment would probably one of the easiest times for them to do it. But they don't want to. They don't want a gun, they don't want to go shooting animals, they just don't want to do it. as can be seen here. You know, 100,000 people out of 127 million is a really low number, isn't it? So, and obviously they're all country people too. There'd be no city people in that group. So there you go. Anyway, hopefully someone found that interesting. More videos coming soon.